Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you. As a child, Isabella had no intention of becoming an artist. All she wanted was to live with her grandfather. She thought she had only one grandfather in the whole world. An old sailor, long ago written off, and even earlier, many years ago, Grandma couldn't stand Grandpa's schedule of long voyages with short intervals. Grandmother, who was just over 40, divorced and then remarried and moved far, far away to the northern city of Peter. Their only daughter, Leslie, at that time studied at a music school and was considered one of the most beautiful girls in the city. Since she had a year and a half to get her diploma, and there she could already teach somewhere in the art school, they decided not to tear her from her place. But that year and a half turned everything upside down. John spent too much time on the road, too little time with his family. One vacation he thought Leslie was in love, too much of his blonde beauty beaming with happiness. At the same time, the rules established by her father remained inviolable. His daughter returned home no later than 10 o'clock in the evening, and she practiced a lot too. He could hear the sound of her violin without end. Leslie reminded John of spring incarnate, with her long wavy hair, her young face, her pink flowered dress, her violin held to her chin. The violin, too, sang of spring. The next time he came home, a shocked John saw that his daughter was pregnant and well past her due date. It was the first time in years that she had not come to meet him at the dock. "Are you getting married?" was the first thing he asked, still in the hallway, dropping his bag rather than setting it down when Natasha's plump figure appeared in the doorway. Leslie shook her head so that tears seemed to fly to the sides. "Daddy, I love him, but I'm not getting married, and I don't want him to know anything more about me." John was desperately uncomfortable, asking his daughter about who he was and why things had turned out this way. "Do you need help?" he only asked. "I mean, deal with it, man to man." She shook her head just as desperately. "Well, well, well." He put his hand on her shoulder fearfully. "Just don't be nervous now." The whole time she was at home, her father was literally dusting off his daughter. He made the clerks at the nearest grocery store laugh a lot, always asking them a question before he started filling the mesh basket. "What's the most useful thing here?" He scrubbed the floors himself too, angrily explaining to Leslie that she would never scrub them the way they were supposed to be scrubbed on a ship. He had not risen to the highest ranks in his nautical work. A mere sailor, so it was his job to scrub the deck. "And you, go onto the galley and stuff us some potatoes for supper. If you don't feel sick, of course," he added cautiously. But the hardest thing for him was to listen in the late evenings to his daughter crying in her room, lying in bed, trying to sob, almost silently. "Leslie, why don't we go shopping? Buy our grandson everything he's supposed to have. A crib. I'll be at sea again when you have your baby. How are you going to carry all that stuff by yourself? Daddy, you don't have to bring it in now. Call order, they'll bring everything and put it where you point your finger. And you can't buy in advance, it's bad luck. And you won't have a grandson, you'll have a granddaughter." "Well," said John jokingly, "I've already raised one sailor girl, and now another is coming. And I hoped a boy. I'll take him with me on the ship." "Leslie, do you want me to read to you? Like when you were a kid, huh? Remember you and I read all of me and read." "Come on, Daddy," she whispered. And now in the evenings they wandered around the island of Borneo again, as they once had, looking for white buffalo, eating durian fruits, and admiring wild mustangs. And to her father's voice, Leslie fell asleep. "What are you going to name the girl?" John asked before he left for his flight. "Isabella." "What's that? I've never heard anyone I know called that in my life." The daughter shrugged. "I like it. I think that was the name of some princess." Heartbroken, John still called his ex-wife before leaving, asking to be with Leslie during this difficult time for her. And then he had a telegram delivered right on board, and the sunny day turned black, as if there had been an eclipse. Leslie died in childbirth from a hemorrhage. It's rare, but it happens these days. John was dropped off at the nearest port. He was on a plane home. He was released. Not his mother-in-law, not even his wife. A daughter, the one and only. The captain was very accommodating. He was met at home by a sharply aged, maddened Ariana. Her new husband had at first allowed her to come alone to be with Leslie, to babysit her granddaughter. When disaster struck, he flew in too, all gathered in one apartment, knocked into a pile of grief for which there are no words and not enough tears. Little Isabella, meanwhile, slow to discharge from the hospital. She was born too tiny, and social services had yet to determine the guardians. Leslie was buried right in the church. They did not call the priest home, but brought and put the coffin in the center of the temple, as if the relatives hoped to beg for Natasha at least there. All the light, if so suddenly everything for her, was cut off here. Ariana did not leave her daughter's body. John and Ariana had lived in this town almost all their lives, and tragedy was rare. Everyone stood with candles, and Ariana lay on the coffin, hugging it with both hands. Hugging it with both hands. At night, the men, ex-husband and current husband, were afraid to move away from her. They were afraid to call an ambulance, or the doctors would not have time to get there. But by dawn, Ariana struggled to get up from the couch and beckoned John into the kitchen. "John, let's go." Shutting the door tightly behind her, she said, "We need to talk. And this. Pour me a vodka." John looked up at her with darkened, sunken eyes, hesitated for a moment, but obediently opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of stolichnaya, popped the cork, and poured the vodka into glasses. "Something to eat. Don't." "Okay, break off a piece of bread. You know who the father is? Well, so she never told you. You know the owner of the castle?" "Yes." Yes, Ross dropped to almost a whisper. John gave an involuntary gasp. How did she? One of the biggest mafiosi. To put it elegantly, in Italian, of their region. A bandit of the highest flight, to put it in Russian. A tacit owner of factories, newspapers, steamships, which formerly had other owners, but in fact, the main money flowed into his pocket. He had two nominal names, which almost merged: monarch and monk. First was born in connection with his power and wealth. The second he owed to the fact that, having divorced his wife and having provided for her and his daughter up to the 7th tribe, he never married again. But the monarch was also famous among the people for having bought a picturesque cape near the town and built a castle on it. Descending to the sea, God knows how much of his fortune he invested in it. But the castle, or palace, outshone many of its counterparts in Europe, once built by famous architects. The beauty of the place itself, the sea and the cliffs, the walls with towers, the arches, the red roof with crenellations. Everything here did not impress with luxury, but so organically fit into the landscape, so poetically looked together with it, that caused delight as a perfect work of art. The castle immediately got on postcards and magnets, became a local attraction. To it were taken excursions, both by land and by sea. But it was impossible to go inside. It was a private property and belonged to such a powerful and mysterious person. Ariana drank her half glass of 40-degree liquid like water. "Pour some more. Pour it or my heart will burst." Leslie was working nights, not just her but a friend of hers. They used to play in the restaurant. Ours played the violin and hers played the violin and hers played the cello. And he didn't take her away by force. She loved him. And from what she told me, it seemed that he loved her too. And how it happened that they broke up, she didn't tell me. "Let me, mother," she said. "I'm like a stone in the water for him, a pebble." She was a proud woman. but it must have hurt her that he didn't look for her, didn't try to get her back. "Well, it's her will," John said deftly. "And here's the thing, Ariana. You and I aren't going to see him either. Not for a beau, not for money. You hear me? Whatever Leslie wants, that's how it's gonna be. And I'd have noticed at the funeral if he wasn't there, wouldn't I? How do I know? I've seen nothing but my Natasha. I'll raise the girl myself," John decided. "How are you?" Ariana jumped up. "I am. I'm taking her away with me." "No!" he almost shouted, and slammed his palm on the table to make sure I said she'd stay here, in her own house, Natasha's house. "I'll find a job on the beach, and all I'll do in life is raise here. And if you want to come to us, whether on your own or with your husband, you're welcome. There's nothing left in my life but this girl, and don't you dare cross me." And for a long time, Ariana cried on his shoulder, and he hugged her, also as a child, and thought his thoughts. 5 years later, it was obvious that the girl's upbringing had taken an unusual path. John's greatest fear was for her health, but to keep her wrapped up and raised in 4 walls, he could not imagine such a thing. On the contrary, he and his granddaughter went for walks along the sea every eve. In winter they fed the seagulls, and John told the girl various tales, many of which he had accumulated in his memory. He told them clearly, translating them into a language accessible to a child. Now he worked at the port, and not full-time, and devoted all his free time to little Isabella. In summer, he and she never left the shore for long. They built sandcastles, searched for beautiful stones and shells, went on exploration in distant lands, as they called those places where it took 2 hours to get to. Isabella in the summer months tanned to black, and her hair, on the contrary, burned out, became flaxen. By this time, it had grown below her waist and curled in large curls. Isabella wore the simplest sundress. She ran almost always barefoot, even on hot stones. In short, there was nothing of a doll, a young lady. John taught Isabella to swim, so that she was not afraid of neither waves nor distances. Isabella's secret love was the Little Mermaid, and she got to play the Little Mermaid at school, a twist of fate. Not modern Ariel, living adventures, mischievous girl, and the same gentle mermaid Anderson, who was to become the foam of the sea. Since the tale of the Little Mermaid on the school stage was not supposed to, under the supervision of the teacher of labor was sewn tulle dress to the floor. Isabella let her hair down, and the girls from the same class got her a headband decorated with white lilies. The prince was played by the tallest and reputedly the handsomest boy in the class, Arthur, but he was not very good at acting. Father the Sea King, a flock of almost wordless sisters. They were only supposed to say a few phrases during the whole performance, the very beauty, Dream, to whom the prince was to leave, and the distant planned sailors on the ship, ladies at the princess, and of course the witch. That's where it all began. Isabella, as has already been said, was so reluctant to be on stage that she was completely confused when they began to discuss the idea of the play. Then the literature teacher, who was in charge of the production, and the boys agreed that Isabella should play the Little Mermaid. Isabella was cheating off Bernard's mouth, which she could not do despite her grandfather's best efforts. "Me," she literally gasped, panic in her voice. If it hadn't been about the teacher, she would have shouted, "You're crazy. I've never. On stage. No, no." Isabella hadn't really performed anywhere until then. She only read, like other children, in front of the whole class, poems assigned in the program. But she read in such a way that, listening to her performance of Tatiana's letter to Onegin, Angelica literally cried, "Come on, come on." The voice could be heard throughout the class. "You can do it." Isabella's eyes were indeed huge, gray-blue, under long, and paint is not necessary, lashes. "Isabella, Isabella, Isabella," the boys chanted. Isabella was well liked in class. Maybe it was because she never thought of herself, never crossed anyone. She was surprisingly good at not arguing with anyone. And cheat in English. Bella found out that she could easily play even if her partner was a chair. She could even explain her love to a chair. But tender words were supposed to say to Arthur, whom she had just pulled out of the sea. And here he was lying on the shore in front of her, and she was whispering confessions, touching his forehead and cheek with her fingers, taking advantage of the fact that the prince had not come to his senses yet. "You're so beautiful. I love you so much." But Arthur heard everything. And at these words of the little mermaid's, the prince's face flushed visibly. Then the witch deprived the little mermaid of her tongue. In the play, she did it with the help of sinister passes, and the role of Isabella became mute. But Arthur, who at the beginning of the rehearsals was in unbelievable agony, for he too had been appointed to the part by order, and had never had any acting ability, was now always looking into Isabella's eyes, trying to take her by the hand and not to let her go at all. "Why are you courting her?" Angelica shouted merrily. "She's just a hand. Me, down for you, a sea baby. You've got another girl." The other girl was played by the tall, stately Angela, who had a really royal posture. And, of course, Angela extremely disapprovingly looked from the height of his height at all the tossing. Worst of all was the girl who played the witch, that is, the main villain. Anderson described her truly nightmarish. The sea witch fed the toad with her mouth as people feed sugar to little canaries. She called the disgusting eels her chickens and allowed them to crawl on her large nostril like a sponge, breast. In addition, it was clear that all the blame for the tragic outcome of the tale, the audience will lay the blame on the witch. After all, if it were not for her, the little mermaid could have explained herself to the prince and even charmed him with her magical voice. The witch, through sheer force, was played by Julianne. It was supposed that she would be dressed in a kind of a robe made of rye, and her face would be painted with black and red paints to make it even more disgusting. And after rehearsal, Isabella saw Julianne crying in the bathroom. "What are you doing?" Isabella was frightened, rushing toward her. "I don't want to be a bogeyman. You're all like that, and I'm like a garden scarecrow. So why did you say yes?" So Angelica said, "Everyone who plays will get A's in literature for the quarter. It's all clear with you." Isabella squeezed her hand tightly. "Let's go to..." and dragged the furious Julianne straight to the literature room, to Elena Anatolievna. She had just cleaned up after the rehearsal and was about to close the room and leave. It was 6 o'clock in the evening after all. "Angelica," Isabella said, as if it were a done deal. "She's playing the Little Mermaid, and I'm playing the witch." The teacher didn't even understand what she was talking about at first, and then she didn't want to argue. No, that's impossible. No substitutions. You're such a great actor. No substitutions. This role is yours. I knew it right away. You can think about a theater career later. Isabella looked into Angelica's eyes, and it was clear in her gaze that Julianne could handle the role of the Little Mermaid. You won't dare to tell Julianne that she is small, ugly. Who will see it all from the audience, and there will be makeup. Don't back down. That's what her grandfather taught her too. Angelica, you're not going to convince me. I'll quit school, Isabella added as a final argument. Well, where are you going to go? The frustrated Tita slumped in her chair and asked Julianne, "Do you even know the part?" and nodded her head furiously. "What's to do with you?" "Rehearsals on Friday." "That's for you, Mermaid, I'm telling you. And to you, to Isabella, I'll say goodbye until the dress rehearsal. The witch has just a few words. Think about the costume. Oh, you've given me quite a task." Once in the hallway, Julianne almost threw herself at Isabella's neck. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But how did you agree to this horror? Don't you feel sorry for your role? No, laughed Isabella. Yours, I mean, mine now, is better. I don't understand how you gave it up. You're joking, Julianne said incredulously, and in her gaze Isabella suddenly read, "Have I been foolish?" Nevertheless, the next day, Julianne brought Isabella a small bottle of Isfahan perfume as a present, and they parted before the dress rehearsal. Only Isabella caught the occasional strange glances of Arthur. The dress rehearsal was to be run in costume, so the actors arrived in the assembly hall long before the start and dragged a mountain of junk with them. There was a tiny dressing room in the auditorium, but there was not enough room for everyone, so Isabella went to the toilet to change. When she slowly entered the auditorium, people almost turned their heads. Yes, the dress was burlap, but damn it, there were real seaweeds running down it. There were real seaweeds running down it. They were dry, soft, brown, and dark green. They smelled like the sea. It wasn't hard at all to get these seaweeds by walking farther down the beach, and to sew them onto a dress was nothing at all. The girl's hair was held by a comb of coral twigs, and no makeup on her beautiful face, except that Isabella was too pale. Voronova stunned the teacher. Make a scarecrow out of yourself. Translated by Bernard, who played the Sea King, and then he summed it up himself. No, there's no way. You can't kill me. The rehearsal began and went on as usual. The little mermaid, hidden behind rocks, looked at people for the first time, saw the handsome prince on board the ship. Bernard and his friends had skillfully carved this ship out of plywood. Then Juliana, the little mermaid, longing, wandered among her sisters and listened to her grandmother's consolations. Let's live happily ever after. We'll have a lot of fun. 300 years is a long time. Tonight we're having a ball at the palace. But that was no consolation to the little mermaid. Isabella was almost certain that in her heart Juliana had long since fallen for Arthur. Perhaps that was why she was so eager to play the part. The little mermaid went to the witch. Isabella was sitting on a large stone, a stool draped with a sheet, deep in thought when the little mermaid came up to her, begging for legs instead of her tired fishtail. The witch's eyes grew cold. The little mermaid repeated her request. The witch hesitated. Then she made a sign with her hand, inviting the girl to sit down. The witch's gesture was so sure that Juliana obediently sank down on the stone and stared at her. I will make you a drink, and you will take it and sail with it to the shore before sunrise, and drink every drop of it. Then your tail will split and turn into a pair of slender, as people would say, legs. Isabella spoke slowly, as if she were compelling every word, but her voice sounded sinister. And Julianne, who knew the role of the witch by heart because it had been her role before, suddenly, here in the schoolroom among the boys, suddenly felt creepy. But you will be in so much pain. Isabella drew her face close to her and spoke as if she were casting a spell. You will retain your smooth gait, no dancer can match you. But remember, you will tread like sharp knives and your feet will bleed. Can you bear it? Then I will help you. Can you? And she dug her fingers into the little mermaid's shoulders, and Julianne could have sworn that claws grew on them, and rays of light spurted from the witch's eyes. The little mermaid's throat constricted. Remember, once you take on human form, you can never be a mermaid again. The witch was already standing a few steps away from the little mermaid, majestic and beautiful, in a way that mortals could not be. She spoke as if she had been through it all herself, as if her power had been earned. Only she didn't become sea foam, she became a witch. According to the script, the witch had another way out. At the very end, when the prince and his young wife came out to accept congratulations from their subjects, there was a thunderclap. The lights went out, and the spotlight beams began to dash frantically. What happened on stage? The audience saw in flashes, in fragments. The sisters covered the little mermaid with a white blanket, under which she squatted and as if disappeared, turning into sea foam. And the next day, already at the performance, with a crowded hall and parents and even along the walls, Crowded happened something that could not be erased or replayed. At that very final moment, Arthur the Prince broke free from the young princess's embrace and stepped forward, stretching out his palms to where the slender figure of the witch was frozen, bent on the rock. "I don't want them all. I don't want to be with them. I'm coming to you," and stepped forward. I don't know where, probably into the abyss of the sea, because the hall immediately turned off the lights in horror. I couldn't think of anything like that with all my imagination. School life went on as usual, except that Julianne had almost stopped talking to Isabella. Arthur followed the girl around like a tethered man. He was so in love with her that it annoyed both the parents of the guy and the head teacher, who had an extremely negative attitude to the novels of school children. The head teacher was a heavy woman of indeterminate age, and Isabella was the most beautiful of the graduates. And it was she who became Anna's head teacher's fault. She seduced the poor boy. "You'll go to the panel. That's where you belong." She threw to the girl at the prom, making Isabella's eyes flap with Isabellum and resentment. It was only much later that Isabella guessed what was the reason for the angry and unfair words. Anna had a daughter growing up who was ugly, resentful of the whole world, and who constantly complained at home about her classmates. Guys at school hated both mother and daughter. After graduating from school, Isabella, without any problems, entered the Institute of Culture at the theater department. Arthur tried to stick there too, but he, despite the fact that the boy was tall, handsome, was rejected at the first round. He hurriedly applied to the Polytechnic, and rumor has it that a year later he was already comforted with another girl. Isabella was having fun studying. Never make a hobby your profession or you'll hate it. Well, what else would I be good for, huh? Small, fragile, almost weightless, Isabella in children's plays could play anyone. Girls, fairies. At the same time, again, as in school, she managed not to cause others neither envy nor irritation. At rehearsals went like everyone else, in a black turtleneck and black pants. So demanded the director that nothing distracted the artists from creating images. And the last thing Isabella wanted to do while working on the play was to show herself. She thought about everything at once. How to do better. Intonation, voice, gesture. However, everyone in the troupe worked with burning eyes, sat up long after the rehearsals were over, discussed the scenery, costumes, lines of characters, argued to the horse this character is really the embodiment of evil or has a secret of its own, and why this one does not find a response in the hearts of the audience, although it seems to be right in everything. We composed songs for the plays ourselves, especially a lot of songs for the Nutcracker. Corey used to play guitar, Silver Doors. The night has opened up to us. No fear, no faithlessness. Love can't be beaten. Corey would shake his head, and a wave of curls would fall over his forehead. He was always ready for the most unthinkable pranks, and he was Isabella's partner in many of her plays. Corey was now always hanging around Isabella's house, getting in the way. "So pretend," seriously, said John. In fact, he liked the boy. By this time, the family had exchanged their apartment in a 5-story building for a small house with a garden in the suburbs. Corey helped dig the beds, pick cherries, and was an ardent supporter of cooking summer meals in a cauldron over a fire. "Well, it tastes different, doesn't it?" he asked, when they all gathered in the grape-covered gazebo and tasted his cool, smoky, like on a camping trip, and Corey squinted blissfully, like a cat licking his spoon. Culesh, essentially a penny's worth of millet, potatoes, fried onions, and bits of chicken, really did seem like the food of the gods. About whose daughter she was, Isabella knew, of course, but that was all. John didn't try to blame her father or ask for any help from him. He had explained all this to Isabella when she was a teenager. "Let's respect your mom. She loved him for something, so she knew something about him that we don't. And help. It's a small world, our little town even smaller. He can't not know that you are there, living, growing. If he doesn't offer to help, We won't impose ourselves. They lived poorly, of course. John worked as a dispatcher at the port, and his salary, as he put it, was enough to cover his food and shame. Isabella learned to sew and knit early to update her in her grandfather's closet. Naturally, they never talked about unfashionable boots and stylish clothes. They survived like many others. They dug beds in the vegetable garden, planted cucumbers and tomatoes, prepared vegetables for the winter. In the house, too, they organized everything with their own hands. Both Isabella and grandfather, the shelves and benches were John's responsibility, and on the curtains embroidered. By Isabella, girlfriends admired. Handmade and how elegant. Monarch ake Alex. For Isabella, as if did not exist. That is, he was somewhere but in a parallel reality. What, where, and which gangsters had, and who reigned over them all, did not interest the girl as much as, for example, all international politics, wholesale and retail. Meanwhile, the only official daughter, Aula, caused the townspeople not only unfriendly interest, but also a lot of questions. Once, in her turbulent youth, she could arrange night races on the streets with friends. They were not too careful of their cars and bikes. Although they cost those mother dear, luckily no one was hurt. Alla could buy for 3 days a graceful old palace, where the city museum was located, and celebrate her birthday there. Let the high season, let the city come to the tourists. But these days the palace belonged to Allah, remembered, and the day of the city Allah could not go out with everyone, and had a whim to organize a concert in his mansion. She wrote out of Moscow artists, much cooler than those who performed in the town square. By the way, the gates at Allah's mansion were such that kids from art school came to sketch them. It was such a molded beauty. Then the girls seemed to quiet down, and there was a rumor that she left either on a trip around the world or somewhere in Indonesia, on distant paradise islands. Allah was gone for a long time, several years probably. She was accompanied by a tall young man, a blond man with the face of a movie actor, handsome from love dramas and erotic adventures. And this sweet couple began to play the family, however. Everyone felt the lull is temporary. He never looked after his health. When he was young, he was sure he'd die in a gunfight. In his mature years, he did not spare himself, saying stiffly, "Business in the United States is not done otherwise." Several times, the monarch still ended up in the hospital. Kidney failure, as later told, hoping for high patronage later, to his bed. Here, even the language will not turn to say to the hospital bed. Ran to the medics of all specialties, and even gynecologists rushed to offer their services. For Isabella, in the theater came a huge black car. She could never identify their brands, only showed Corey with her hands. This one had this rounded butt, and the nose is very nice, with beautiful headlights. Corey would roll his eyes and say she wasn't even blonde when it came to car stuff. Blondes at least know where to read the make of the car. Isabella was called back from rehearsal. A guy of enormous stature immediately came up to her, took her by the shoulder. "Let's go to Alex's." "To whom?" Isabella was completely confused, not knowing whether she should grab the nearest stationary object, even that column by the dressing room, and call for help. Though against such an amassed man, who of their theatrical deadbeats could stand? "To Yukolov." "Well, to your daddy. Got it. Let's go to the hospital. He's waiting." To say Isabella was astonished was an understatement. So the monarch knows she exists, so he's calling her himself. It reassured Isabella a little to know that she was going to the city hospital, a crowded and well-known place, and not to some secluded country estate. Ambal almost dragged Isabella through the lobby. His steps were too wide and her heels too small, and shoved her into a black car, once again of unknown make, parked at the entrance. Isabella went inside, and the windows of the car were tinted. It seemed that potholes in the road did not exist for her. She flew over them like a bird flying through the air. "What about Alex?" Isabella dared to ask after a few minutes. Ambal sighed. "The doctors say It's unlikely they'll be able to pump it out this time. That's what I heard. His kidneys are dead. He's been offered a transplant so many times. The ambulance drove the girl literally to the doorstep of the urologist's office. As she slid out of the car, Isabella felt a great relief. But when they got to the third floor in the elevator, the ambo took Isabella to a corner of the corridor. That seemed completely deserted. He opened a door that had no room number on it. I guess those who are seriously ill don't have a lot of luxury. Isabella had heard of VIP rooms where half the wall was occupied by a plasma TV, a carpet on the floor, and an expensive cognac on the table by the bed. There was nothing in this room except a hospital bed of a complex device. They say multifunctional and medical equipment that took up all the free space. On the bed lay a man. He was lying flat, and he didn't even lift his head to look at the people who had entered. Isabella was struck by the yellow, especially in contrast to the white sheets, color of the patient's puffy face, and the glassy hue of it. The ambulance let Isabella into the room and closed the door behind her. She stood for a few moments, then timidly, with cautious steps, approached the bed. The patient must have heard her footsteps and tapped his fingers on the blanket, saying, "Come here, sit down." Isabella came closer and sank down on the hard chair beside the bed. Now the man was looking at her, and she at him. Isabella somehow did not understand or think about the fact that here he was, her own father, Alex, the gray cardinal of their region. She saw a man who is very seriously ill, most likely. Fatally, it is not to say that she never thought about a possible meeting with her father. And she was surprised at herself. She had no fear or excitement in her soul before such a meeting. And for that, she had to thank her grandfather. John had brought up his granddaughter in such a way that she did not feel hatred for her father, nor did she have any expectations that she had been deceived. And now, there was only participation and pity in her gaze. And he, apparently, could not even speak in full voice. He spoke weakly and faintly, barely audible. "I'm here. Thank you for coming." "Of course I did, but I only found out today that you were calling me. I thought you didn't even know I existed." "Fool," he sighed softly. "I'll tell you, since Leslie never loved anyone. That's why I let her go. She didn't know who I was at first. She fell in love with a man. And when she realized, when she got closer to me, what was I supposed to do? You can't take off your skin. You can't put on another. You can't wash yourself off." He covered Isabella's hand with his heavy, already cold hand. When Leslie was gone, I repent. I thought, like those who lost their favorite dog and agonize. I'm just saying that to make it clearer. I've decided that I'll never let myself get attached to anyone else. I'm not going to open up, because it was so painful to lose her. It would have been easier to die, 100 times easier. That's why I erased everything from my memory, for a long time, until now. I tried to erase you too. You look like your mother. Leslie's eyes. Those big, big eyes. And like her, you never asked me for anything. I have everything, Isabella said hurriedly. But is there nothing they can do to help you? Maybe we should go to another hospital. To Washington, D.C. You're a naive fool, he repeated. Obviously, he didn't know how to speak rudely, be afraid of Allah. Such a bitch has grown up. Why would I be afraid of her? Isabella didn't understand. I don't even know her. Fear, he repeated. I'll have them keep an eye on you, of course. And I'm sorry. I deprived you of a mother, and you had no father. It's not you. It's fate. It happens. Sometimes women die like that, like Mom. And Dad. You shouldn't say that either. My father is my grandfather. I'll look at you a little more, and then you'll go. You're too much. At least Leslie looked at me again with lively eyes. Your eyes, There's no other eyes like them. Don't curse me. I've got a lot of sins to answer for out there right now. And for you and your mom, that's the worst sin of all. Now go. I need medicine. I can't stand it any longer. I waited for you. I tolerated it. And now I can't. I'll get a shot now. I'll sleep. I won't cry out in front of you. Isabella bent down and kissed his forehead. That waxy yellowness. He had not been expecting that at all. When she unbent, she saw that tears were streaming from under his eyelids. The ambulance was waiting at the door, keys twirling on his finger. You want me to take you back to the same place I took you from? I'll get there myself, she said. Stay here in case he needs anything, and let me know if he needs anything. Isabella left the hospital, but, shaken by what had happened, she could not return to the theater, but went home. There she and John sat in the kitchen until dawn drinking tea. Isabella recounted the short conversation with her father over and over again. John's memory flashed back to what he'd told his granddaughter that she'd never heard, because they'd tried to keep the details from her. And what a difficult time it had been when Leslie had waited for her. Isabella apparently having made the decision overnight to sever the ties that bound her to the bandit. And how he, the father, tried to bring his daughter out of despair, bringing her back to her childhood. They read the same books together that they had read many years ago. Walking holding hands. How the hell was he supposed to feel better? If that's how he felt about Natasha. He hadn't picked up a young lady from a restaurant, but had fallen in love with a girl he couldn't forget and remembered in his dying hour. In the morning, the news reported that a famous businessman, philanthropist, and blah had died at night. And though they both, Isabella and John, knew it was coming, Isabella cried and couldn't calm down for a long time, and her grandfather sat beside her and stroked her hand. The next day, the ambulance man, whose name was actually Frederick, called to tell him where and when the funeral would be, and asked where to send the car for Isabella. I'll come myself, she protested. The cemetery will be blocked off, Frederick explained patiently. You don't have a car, and they won't let you take a cab. Don't wait, just give me the address. In the end, it was just the three of us. Isabella, a little girl in a black dress, John, who was afraid to let his granddaughter go into the bandit's nest, and Corey, under the pretense of protection from the same nest, but really because he always followed Isabella around. Besides, he was terribly curious, and he was anxious to see how the chief bandit was buried. In the morning, Isabella ran to the market for roses. She came back upset. I asked for black ones. And the salesman says, why does such a young girl need black ones? Well, tell me, do you want 5 pinks and 2 whites, or 5 whites and 2 pinks? I yelled. Give me 6 black ones. My father's dead. Even those who knew Isabella could hardly recognize her in the faceless black dress, the black headscarf hiding her hair, the dark glasses. She wanted to be seen as little as possible by her family and friends. Suddenly, she had a daughter from somewhere. And what Alex had with her mother. She considered it a secret and the most precious thing to the two of them, and she didn't want it to be touched. I mean, eyes and tongues. She'd stand there, say goodbye, and disappear. She would hope that no one on her father's side would ever think of her again. Frederick appeared as a true lord in an iron suit and white shirt, solemn and businesslike. He said to Isabella, tell him to be at the notary's office by 11 tomorrow. Here's the address and phone number. Why? They're going to read the will. Yeah, you don't have a car. I'll take you. Your father must have left you some sort of inheritance, John suggested. I don't need anything. It was good that we said goodbye. I think it made him feel better, and it makes me feel better. I don't need anything else. Frederick gave her a quick glance. There were indeed a lot of people in the cemetery. It was like a government funeral. The paths were lined with expensive cars, mostly middle-aged men, but there were women too. Alex's funeral was held in the cemetery chapel, but Isabella was amazed when she saw that it was the bishop himself. There was only enough room in the small chapel for the loved ones. The others stood in a wide semicircle around the chapel. Isabella noticed that almost every family attending the funeral had one or two young jocks standing near them, staring blankly at the coffin but watching the crowd closely. Bodyguards, she realized. She and her grandfather and Frederick had their own bodyguard too. Frederick. Isabella hoped she wouldn't see him again after the funeral. The main seat. Well, maybe after the deceased and the bishop at the funeral was occupied by Alex's daughter, a woman in her 30s. She was small, red-haired, her wavy hair cut into a bob, and she wore a black hat with a veil. She was next to the coffin, the first to be approached with condolences. The woman spoke softly, but authority emanated from her whole figure. Isabella felt uncomfortable, but then, when the funeral was held, they were standing on the platform, and everything was broadcast from the chapel through loudspeakers. Isabella forgot about everything and cried again. He must have been in a lot of pain. When I saw him, he was so sick. It's good that he's in pain now. That he's not in pain. Frederick behind her back coughed. We've got it. All the meds we need. They gave him drugs there. Really? Corey put his arms around Isabella and she cried, clinging to him. Now she had no one in the world but John and Frederick. The candles were blown out and the service was over. The coffin with the deceased was solemnly carried out and placed on special stools. It was time to say goodbye. Let's not make speeches, Alla said, and her voice sounded harsh. We'll make speeches later in the restaurant. And now let's just say goodbye to Dad, to a man you all knew well, who meant a lot, probably to everyone here. Daddy's been very sick and very aerial, and we're saying goodbye to him today. And let's each of you just come up and say thank you to him. And the first bent over the coffin, kissed her father, whispered something to him, and stepped back a couple of steps, frozen near the coffin as a sphinx, a stone statue. The next one went to say goodbye, and then Frederick took Isabella firmly under the elbow and led her across the court, in front of everyone. Where to, my God? Saying goodbye. Your family, you're my own daughter. And Isabella, without raising her eyes, with her cheeks burning, feeling that everyone was looking at her, and for many it was a revelation. No one had known about her for years. Isabella found herself at the luxurious mahogany coffin. Her father lay before her, just as she had seen him a few days ago. The same puffy face, yellowed skin. Whatever the medication, he must have suffered a lot. Only he didn't have the painful crease between his eyebrows that she'd seen in the hospital. And there was a feeling that there was a special bond between her and her father. That conversation in the ward. The things he'd said to her about her mom that no one else had witnessed. Thank you for coming, he said to her then. And she came again. Isabella placed roses at the feet of the deceased, then bent over him and kissed his forehead. You'll see your mom there, she whispered. Tell her I love her. I love you. And when she unbent, her father's forehead was wet with her tears. She tried not to look at Alla. She was afraid. She hurried back to her seat and John attacked Frederick. Why did you do it? Now everyone will see, everyone will know. What will they do to her now? What does she want? She could have lived in peace like before. Why did you bring her? She is a daughter, replied Frederick adamantly. Of course, they didn't go to any restaurant. And again, they sat with my grandfather until late at night, discussing what this visit to the notary would mean. I'll give up everything at once, Isabella said. You wait, John objected. We never asked for anything for you. And that's right. But he's made up his mind. Maybe he wants to give your mother a present through you, to make her feel better that you're not so exposed. I'm old now. I don't have much hope from my grandmother either. But I'm already working. I know, don't get upset. But life. It's all kinds of things. Anything can happen. There's kids who are sick. They're raising money from scratch. And if he left you a little money, I'd be glad, to be honest. Even though you may not have known me that way. I really didn't know. Grandpa, why would I do that? I'll be hated by that very daughter. Did you think you'd only be loved in life? You have to stand up to hatred too, otherwise you won't live. If you're cowardly, you'll sit, as Frederick would say, by the gutter for the rest of your life. Besides, I don't think he's hurt his daughter if he even remembered you. Though, he has a difficult daughter, but I think he didn't hurt her, so you take your time. Listen to what they tell you, and then we'll talk about it at home. The next day, John and Isabella went to the address. They were astonished when the receptionist, upon hearing the name, was as gracious as if she had been to the most important client. I have nothing to do there, John decided, nodding at the notary's office. I'll wait in the waiting room. Maybe they'll throw me a newspaper. The girl was even more pleased. Apparently that was how Isabella was supposed to enter the office alone. Of course, and magazines and coffee. Or perhaps you prefer tea, sugar, cream, cake or cookies? John winked at Isabella, saying, I won't be lost here, you see, and the girl entered the office with a calm mind. Emma, the notary, turned out to be an old woman. It turns out that she was at school with Alex, and she met Isabella not just friendly, but motherly. Sit down, my dear. When your father told me. Of course it was. I was very anxious to see you. Did he tell you he'd made a change in his will? No, Isabella answered timidly. He and I didn't talk about it at all. We didn't care about it. But how? The notary seemed dumbfounded. She adjusted her glasses, then took them off and looked at Isabella without her glasses. He must have made a deal with you. We saw each other for the first time, the last day of his life. We talked for about 10 minutes. He couldn't take much more, and we had more to talk about than wills. The notary coughed. Then let's wait for Alla, and then I'll read the will in front of her. A few minutes later, the door opened swiftly, and Alla and her friend entered. She was still in mourning, but it was a very stylish mourning. Black silk blouse with fine embroidery, black pants, and high boots. She hardly looked at Isabella, said hello to Emma, and sank into a chair. But Isabella caught the very intense, appraising gaze of her friend. This handsome young man. He was looking at her so confidently and so shamelessly, as if he could offer to make love to her right here in his office, and it would be no big deal. Isabella stirred, clasped her hands. Compared to these masters of life, she seemed like a girl, small, thin, in a black dress on the corner of a chair. And why should she do all this when she already had everything in her life? There is a house. There are those whom she loves. There is a theater where she can be from morning till evening. There is the happiness of creative work. There is the sea. There is life ahead, in which there can be so much more, and new roles and travel, and people with whom you can be friends. She listened to the notary listing what Alla inherits. Cash sums, stocks, more stocks. Some kind of cosmetic clinic, restaurants, several, I think. Real estate, more. Isabella stared at her clenched fingers, wishing with all her might that this friend of Alla's would finally take his eyes off her, and for it to be over, and for them to be let go. And suddenly there was a dead silence. Isabella raised her head in fright and saw that Alla was staring at her, and swallowing her saliva so hard that it was audible. What? She asked guiltily. Did I miss something? Isabella, you get the real estate. Even in her voice you could hear that Emma sympathized with her. She said it in a completely different tone. And then there were numbers, meters, address. And seeing that Isabella still didn't understand anything, the notary specified you get the castle. The very same one. And a monthly maintenance of 100,000 rubles. When were the changes made? Alla's voice was sharp and hoarse, as if she hadn't opened her mouth for a long time and suddenly spoke. And the notary's voice sounded impassive. May 7th, 5 days ago. So you went to see him at the hospital? Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't you tell me my father had changed his will? I'm sorry, but I don't have to do this. Besides, it was my client's wish. But then you could call to tell me what he cheated on. Emma took off her glasses again, her tone cold. I beg your pardon? He left, but I stayed. And that's something we could have worked out with you. Do you realize, Allah shouted, do you realize that I'm going to argue? That's your right. The notary spoke calmly and measuredly, but I doubt you'll succeed. With mutual desire, you can make an agreement with your sister. With whom? Allah asked in that mock humiliating tone, as if she were being asked to marry someone from the untouchable caste. Her companion covered her hand with the palm of his hand in a soothing gesture. Allah, calm down. We've discussed this option. The woman wanted to say something else, but she rose abruptly and headed for the exit, leaving them with the bitter smell of perfume. Her friend stood up, waved his arm slightly, apologizing, and followed her. Isabella couldn't get up. Her legs, arms, and everything else that could shake were trembling. "Baby," said Emma, "can I give you some Corvalline? Or shall we just open the champagne?" For the past few years, Allah had been able to lead the kind of life she liked. She could live anywhere in the world and do whatever she wanted. She began to study philosophy out of nothing to do. She was staying in Thailand at the time, and Buddhism, so to speak, was at her disposal. But Allah did not last long on the way to nirvana. By nature, she was hard, sharp, and her previous life had made an additional imprint on her. Allah remembered her childhood very well, which was in the 90s. No, her family did not starve. Her father would never have allowed it. But it was at that time she realized that all the issues that life throws up, you need to solve quickly, as if you are carried by the river and ahead of the rapids, that you cannot pity anyone. You will certainly and meanly deceived. Often it will turn out that the one you pity lives much better than you. And even if he doesn't, he won't help you if you are in trouble. People are ungrateful. She realized that you can't get anywhere without cruelty. Allah remembered how they had moved from the old apartment to the mansion, and it seemed terribly large and uncomfortable, although there was everything, and a large open terrace, and a tower with a winter garden, and a lot of rooms, which she never tried to count. The mansion bordered on the forest, and on winter evenings to look out the window was creepy. What if there were wolves? Her mother only waved her away. What wolves, she said. There was no one scarier than the couples in love who came here, at the end of the forest road, to kiss in silence in the lap of nature. My father was laconic. 3-meter brick fence under video surveillance, barbed wire dogs. Not enough for you? Then at school, Allah could hear the conversations behind her. The place where her father and a few other acquaintances had built their houses had always been something of an extension of the city park, and no one liked the fact that now there were owners here whose peace to disturb. Undesirable. But my father never gave a damn what anyone else thought. Not giving a damn is a polite way of putting it. He'd say, "Fuck it." Then there was the dog. A car hit a dog on the road in front of their house. It's rare in general, cars pass by here, if only a few times a day. The poor guy was just unlucky. It wasn't their dog, an unfamiliar mongrel. Allah heard a shriek, ran out through the gate and saw this little reddish dog, bloody, twitching convulsively. She ran after her father again because he was the only one who could tell the chauffeur to take the dog to the vet. Her father went out the gate with her, took a quick look, and went back into the house. A couple minutes later, he returned with a gun, and with one accurate shot, he ended the doggie's suffering. Allah sobbed then, and her father gave up. Now he is not in agony and has gone to his own place. Dad was gone a lot. Not only for long, anxious nights, but for weeks. Mother would lie awake with fear for him, walking through those empty rooms, up and down the stairs, pale, crunching her fingers. Then she was overcome with anger and shouted that that bastard had probably had a lot of mistresses long ago, and they were sitting here like in prison, and they were not allowed to go anywhere. And it was true. The fence was up, but there were guards around the house all the time. The servants did the groceries. Mothers rarely enough, 2 or 3 times a month, could take the car and go shopping, accompanied again. Guard to go shopping or to visit friends. Alla was taken to school and brought back. "I'm sick of it," screamed the mother. She was young, beautiful, elongated green eyes, long Isabellum-Rude earrings along her cheeks. "Why the hell did you lock me in?" she almost shrieked. "I want to go to work, to people, to the gym, to the pool." "You've got a pool in the basement. You can drown yourself," my father said. "Can you understand that I know they can't get to mine here behind these walls? Or do you want to go to your fucking office, you fucking accountant? She's got nothing to eat." Alla was allowed to invite her friends to visit her sometimes, but her parents did not allow any of the girls she knew to visit her. Then this period ended. Her father, if I may say so, moved to a new level. His influence and power became too great for anyone to dare to raise a hand against him or his family. After the 90s ended, the bandits had to hide their weapons, get out of their crowns, and behave like good citizens, or to disappear unnoticed. Now it was possible not only to drive quietly around the city wherever one liked. They regularly went abroad. At first, Turkey seemed a wonderland. Then the geography began to expand to Europe, the Caribbean, Indonesia. More often they traveled without their father. Only Alla and her mother. When they arrived, my mother always tried to get Alla into a youth club somewhere. "Get to know your peers and don't get bored," she said. As a result, each lived her own life. Alla learned to explain herself in several languages so that she would be understood. Riding a motorcycle was the most convenient way to get around wherever they went. Rent a motorcycle and go 4, wheeling with the wind, whistling in your ears. Alla always had a great fondness for the local bartenders, as he could impose any unfamiliar cocktail with an exotic name and then charge triple the price for it. She also tried marijuana with those notorious peers, which would be more appropriate to call suicide bombers. So they liked to race at night on the roads on the same bikes, so enthusiastically compared with a kind of connoisseurship of the dignity of drugs and their partners, and partners and partners, and partners and partners who changed at least once a week. Mother, although she was near, as if moving farther and farther away. So Alla was neither surprised nor saddened when she decided to divorce her father. "Just don't get him too excited about money," she told her mother. "Why?" She raised her eyebrows now. "Thank God there's something to take from him. I didn't torture myself for 20 years for nothing." Alla snorted insultingly at the word tormented and cut off. "'Cause I'm staying with him. You're not going to your lover's house, are you?" Her mother wanted to slap her, but she was wary. Alla could have done the same, and her hand was strong. Her mother was really going to her new friend, expecting him to give her the attention she had been missing all her life. Going out together, doing the house together, hosting guests together. What was wrong with that after all? She didn't understand why her daughter was so angry. Alla was annoyed by her stupidity, because this new slug and her mother and him together will live as they do now. Because it is not given to him or to her to strengthen the power and to build up her power. But the father does. The divorce has taken place. Alla feared in vain. There was not only a noble male, from Alla's point of view, idiotic gesture. "Everything for you, nothing for me, I'm leaving with a suitcase." There was not even equal sharing. Father had long foreseen what was coming. Mother got her share. Another woman would have considered herself rich, but Mother shook her fists in impotent rage, repeating phrases about her ruined life. "He's gonna fuck you now. Let him feed you." Her father wouldn't listen to her. Alla felt like the only woman in the monarch's life. The only woman who would no longer have to share anything with anyone, whose capriciousness would be admired and whose pampering would be encouraged. She considered it a good tone to understand jewelry as a professional jeweler, and in general did not try not to allow herself anything unworthy. so that her acquaintances would not see her in a car of an unworthy brand, that her clothes would be bought in fashionable houses that could not humiliate the client with their name. That, at the resorts where she goes, did not rest Bull and Chabla. Through having communicated with the golden youth of Europe, Allah changed her idea of beautiful. And now, it was sometimes possible to meet her on the street in a t-shirt and jeans, and with a backpack behind her back. She began to realize that it was necessary to at least play into the fact that luxurious things are not a cult for her. Otherwise, in those circles in which she sought to become her own, she too will be considered a bumpkin. Good for them, she thought, from generation to generation fed, did not know grief. They did not have to survive at any cost. After school, she had to get an education, and she, her parents agreed on the opinion, studied to be an economist. Her father didn't let her get excited, although he only had to blink and a red diploma would have been brought to her house. "When I'm gone, you'll take the empire in your hands," my father used to say, "and you have to know how to manage." And Allah, not daring to disobey, went to classes and took exams. But she was used to disobeying, to living her own way. That's why from time to time she had a breakdown. Then there were those races on the night streets, but it was good that it was not streets, but it was good that it was not. She was still on drugs then. She could urgently zabanduriyut, right in the middle of the night, right after a night of drinking, to confess, and she drove to the temple, beat her fists and heels in the heavy oak doors, demanded to open it and immediately absolve all sins. And if the bishop was not something like a friend at home, did not come to the castle to listen to organ concerts, my father especially wrote out musicians. The scandal would hardly have been hushed up. Father refused. When she celebrated her 25th birthday and wanted to invite his company to Gududut in the castle. But the castle, which cost fabulous money, had some special meaning for his father. He rarely let strangers in, reigned there himself, was within these walls really monarch, resting from the bustle, listening to the silence. He walked along the corridors, which made one think of the Middle Ages, in a long robe, with his hands behind his back, and God knows what he was thinking about. Like any unattainable toy, the castle beckoned Allah most of all, and she kept a watchful eye on whether her father was going to marry again. That would be the worst of all. After receiving her diploma and trying to join the affairs of the empire, Allah quickly got bored and asked for a vacation, from which she has not returned since. She enrolled in the correspondence faculty of philosophy, a woman who Isabello's philosophy. And she went to the East. She wanted to write her diploma on one of the Eastern religious movements. Allah stayed in Japan for a while, then lived in Indonesia for a few years. Somehow she liked everything here. She loved contrasts. The luxury of the villa she rented and the simple, frank life of the tropics, where you can walk almost naked, eat salmon just out of the sea and into the frying pan, and spend nights breathing in the scent of exotic flowers. She moved to Thailand, where she met Mickey. God knows what he was doing there. She was living in Samui, at the Conrad Hotel, and she wanted to stay there for a long time. In the mornings, and she got up early. She would sit on the sofa on her balcony, breathing in the fresh gulf of Thailand breeze that ruffled her hair, and then to read philosophical treatises, sprawled on a huge bed and looking out the panoramic window at the silver surface of the bay and the sinking islands in it. Such a way of life is very disposed to philosophy, and a round bath with flower petals and long sit-downs in a restaurant that looked like a pagoda standing on the shore. What was Mickey doing here? An American, by the way, and according to the opinion of those living in Conrad, an incomparable billiard player. Maybe Allah fell for his hands at first sight, hands with such sensitive fingers, hands that always struck the right blow. Mickey's hair was whitened by the sun almost to a flaxen color, and his eyes were as clear as this water, in which Allah entered every morning, wearing only thin strips of bikini. They got together quickly, talking in the restaurant like old friends, two compatriots. There were no Americans except them in Conrad then, and all the time to talk in English. A green boredom. If you swear, they won't understand. They will smile kindly and bow, almost to your waist. And Allah was already tired of not having sex by that time. And with him, sex was truly royal. Mickey let her enjoy it as much as she needed, until she was exhausted, and he enjoyed it himself. "How long have you lived here?" she asked him once. He shrugged. "Second year." She also did not know, nor did she try to ask in detail, what he did in life. "I play the stock market," he said, and that was it. "Good thing it wasn't in a casino," she snorted, although basically the same shit. As good as Allah's life had been before Mickey, it had taken on a different meaning with him. They had gotten caught in a storm while sailing on a yacht, and although there are no big waves in the Samway area, they had been lucky enough to get battered. It was the first time Allah had experienced such a feeling of fear, and Mickey laughed. "You stick around till summer, I'll show you a real storm in the Indian Ocean, when the water is boiling and the whole world goes wild." He wasn't afraid of anything. And she, never one to venture into the extreme, had traveled with him to the jungle, and they'd spent the night wrapped in the same blanket, still gritting their teeth in the morning. She didn't think about the future, as long as she wanted it to go on like this. And they stayed here, the two of them, in this tropical paradise, and every day they molded their world with their own hands, molding it into new shapes. And then she got a call from home, from this parallel universe, telling her that her father was dying and there was no chance. And she had to do what she wasn't going to do in the next few months: Isabellum flight schedules, buying tickets, ordering cabs, packing her bags. She was afraid Mickey wouldn't go with her. She couldn't be sure of anything with him, but he took it for granted that he would go with her. And Allah was deeply, tearfully grateful. "We'll go to the castle," she said. "It's nice there too. I'll take care of things, find out what's going on, and then we can come back here if you want. I'll make sure you don't get bored there." And in the airplane during the long flight, she held his hand like a little girl who is afraid of being left alone. And now, when her father died, as everyone expected, something happened that she could not have dreamed in her worst dream. She had never heard of her father's mistress, that wench with whom he had lived long ago, and for some reason had not sent her away, as he had once sent her to her mother. To his mother he did not consider himself indebted. And here, and this newfound sister, which was not enough to wipe off the face of the earth. Yes, Allah would be desperately sorry if she was allocated at least some modest content. She would try to repel even that. And now the castle was floating away. The jewel in her father's inheritance. And the rest of the inheritance wasn't just passing into Alina's hands. Economist after all, she grasped the essence of the will at once, not like this hen who blew it all. Allah had at her complete disposal a trifle, scraps, a cosmetology clinic, a couple of restaurants, a block of stock, and those enterprises, which openly and unofficially belonged to his father. There were still their managers, and she could only have a percentage of income. To dispose of all this she could not, father, as if telling her from the other world. You did not become an assistant hanging out in their resorts, did not learn anything. Suck now, paw, look into other people's hands. How much they sprinkle you feed. She heard his sneering voice. Her sister, who was a newcomer, received a pittance of money, though, and she would also receive it every month on her account. But the castle, and the means for its maintenance, so that she would not have to spend on it herself. All this fell into her hands as a ripe fruit. All this was completely unfair, and Allah was rushing around the family mansion, and now she was not allowed to go into the castle, ready to smash everyone and everything. Mickey, sitting in an 18th century chair, was watching her with the same calm, mocking gaze that he always had. "Are you going to leave me now?" she asked suddenly, stopping in the middle of the room. "Come on, my kitty. What are you talking about? I don't understand why you're freaking out. A young girl Poor, inexperienced. Nobody knows her. The problem can be solved much easier, believe me. They had to get used to the idea that everything in their lives was going to change. Isabella had been released from the theater for 3 days, and they couldn't wait any longer. What if I had gotten the flu? She asked Corey. And then there was this long-distance call on their old, broken-down telephone on the nightstand. Every time they picked up the phone, he and Grandpa didn't know if they would be able to talk. If they would be able to talk, if they would be able to hear, and this time they heard perfectly. A light, somewhat mocking female voice answered her yes, and asked, "Isabella?" "Yes." "Hello, this is Allah." Isabella was already clinging to the nightstand. "I wanted to invite you to my place. We need to talk. You understand that, don't you?" "No, I'm not going to take anything away from you, challenge you. We just need to meet. We're alone now, after all. Daughters of the same father. You don't have a mother either, do you?" Isabella paused. She needed to deal with her excitement. "Where do you want to see me? Can you do it tomorrow?" 6 o'clock. "Oh, you're rehearsing." "Yes, I know you're playing at the theater." 8 o'clock. 9. Feel free to make an appointment. You'll be picked up and dropped off. I live in Sunny Beach, you know. Will you come? They agreed on 8 o'clock. After hanging up the phone, Isabella recounted the conversation to the men. They were as stunned as she was. She changed her course abruptly. John said, "Just now, she was ready to eat you, and now she's tailing you." "Are you seriously going to go?" Corey asked. Isabella nodded. "I'll go. She's not really gonna kill me." Corey shook his head and said thoughtfully, "Who knows? Who knows?" The next day at the rehearsal, Isabella looked at everything with completely different eyes, confused by the role. She arrived at Allah's house when it was already dark. The neighborhood was elite, occupied part of the coast. The sea splashed under the windows of these mansions. Strangers couldn't get here. They wouldn't be allowed in. There was a guard post and a barrier. It was not for nothing that Allah had sent her car to pick Isabella up. The gates were welcomingly opened, and Allah met her on the porch. "If you look for it yourself, you might get lost," she said with a laugh. Stone forest. If you don't make arrangements in advance, the owners won't open the door. Have you done all your chores? Come on, let's go. She led Isabella into a spacious hall on the first floor. It was a hall, not a large room. It was decorated in a modern style. White, black, gray, the bare minimum, glass, leather, metal. When they sat down, sofas and a low table stood in the center of the room. Allah intercepted Isabella's gaze as she looked at the fireplace, where the electric flames flickered. "I don't live here much," she explained, "but I need a fireplace here. It gets chilly in winter, and I don't want to bother with a real one to heat it. I don't even want to wait for someone to do it. I'm lazy. But here I turn it on, and it's warm." It was as if she was beginning to recognize Isabella as her equal, allowing her into her world. "I didn't know anything about you. Or you. Can I use the you word? You and your mom. Dad must have loved her a lot, huh?" The last thing Isabella wanted to do in these walls was talk about her mother. She never would. "I can't say anything about that. My mom and I never got to meet. Yes, I've been told." Terrible, of course, Allah said to practically these days. "From childbirth, my father probably didn't know anything. If he'd intervened, found another clinic, real doctors, she would have been saved." Isabella was silent. "And yet I think he loved her very much. To remember her all his life. To feel indebted to her. That's a very romantic story. Do you have a picture of your mother with you? I'd love to see it. You know how curious I am." "Not with me." Isabella interlocked her fingers in her lap. "Grandpa has it in his album, of course. You'll show me next time, right? I'll probably leave again soon, but we'll still see each other sometimes, call each other back. You're not going to leave here? Not yet. I've got my grandfather and my job. It's a good thing your father left you some money, too. Believe me, it's expensive to maintain a castle. But he took care of it. I recognize my dad. He's so abrupt, so rough. But when it came to business, you could always count on him. Isabella almost said that during that brief meeting, she had felt a sharp pity for her father, so apparently lonely. But she restrained herself. She wanted to be very careful. The blond man in the white suit, who looked like a movie actor, looked into the room and then entered. He nodded to Isabella. "You've already seen Mickey," said Alla. "Well, let's have a drink, shall we?" She smiled slightly, waving her hands. "I mean, we're just now getting to know each other for real. At the notary." "Sorry, I was a little overwhelmed." "That's understandable. So, sis, what do you want, whiskey? Wine, champagne? Or do you like something sweet? Liqueur, maybe? Try Pedro Jimenez sherry. Sweet as honey." She went to the door, said something, and in a few minutes a middle-aged woman, apparently a servant, rolled in a table. Abella looked at everything with the eyes of a beggar. The sherry was already poured into glasses, but there was also a bottle of dark glass in a wicker basket, and sliced cheese with specks of mold and fruit. "Well," cheered Alla with a smile. Isabella reached out timidly and picked up the nearest glass. She could not even reach for the moldy cheese. It was as if it had been kept in the grave. "Oh, I'm a fool, I'm a fool, I'm a fool. I'm a fool, I'll never learn to live luxuriously," she scolded herself. They sat there for perhaps 2 hours. Mickey was probably bored, for he did not enter into conversation, and after a while he bowed and left. Alla chatted relaxed and at ease. She talked about Thailand, sat down with Isabella with her smartphone, showed her photos, explained what it was, where it was taken. It was all so simple, even ordinary. Now everyone brought photos from their travels, shared their impressions with gusto, talked about what their interlocutors had not yet seen. Yeah, your own private pool. Can you imagine? If you don't want to go to the sea, I don't know how to say it, the sea, the ocean. No, I mean, it's 2 steps away, but sometimes it's still lazy. I'm telling you, I'm lazy. For me, someone would be standing over me with a parchment. Just like that, you pour yourself a juice, get in the pool, and it's not hot. It's a buzz. Then Alla asked Isabella about the theater. Does she play adult roles, or is it more childish? Is the prince handsome in the Nutcracker? Do they go on tour with the troupe? Hadn't you been to the castle yet? She asked. Well, it's gorgeous there, of course. Do you want me to give you a tour later? An author's tour with my own impressions? And Isabella was not afraid at all, and the Spanish sherry was delicious, so they shared a bottle. Yes, Alla, please. And I'm inviting you to the play. On May 15th, we're opening night. I'll be there, Alla laughed. If I'm not leaving yet, I'll definitely be there. Mickey and I will bring you such a bouquet. It'll be the biggest. Do you like roses or lilies, honey? What color? Or maybe orchids? Her voice was already completely drunk and she was laughing. Alla, I have to go now. Otherwise, Grandpa will come looking for me here. Let him come. We'll pour him a drink, too. No, I'm telling you, let him come. Let him come. Call him. Alla pushed her in the side. I want to see your grandfather. You're lucky to have a grandfather. Alla. Stop it. You're going to fall asleep, and I can't get out without your help. Call me a cab. Wow, what cab? I told you you'd get a ride. I'll call you. Isabella didn't get home until the 2nd hour of the morning, when John was already fumbling at the gate, darting out into the street and looking at the road.
What was that witch up to?
And when Isabella arrived, he had not even the strength to scold her, for he was so relieved. Alla was lying in her bedroom, across the huge bed, crying in her sleep. The sherry must have been very good indeed, for the next day Isabella did not even have a headache. Grandpa, I'm sorry. Why you, my fool, why you? He wondered. How could you? I'm the one who tormented everyone. I'm the one who started all this with the inheritance and everything else. John rubbed her head. It was important to him that everything end well for her. He drank a glass of the strong cherry wine he left over from last year and reached for a pickle. Isabella salted small, 2 little fingers, young cucumbers with dill and garlic. It was unusually tasty. "What time do you have to be at the theater tonight?" he asked. "There's a rehearsal at 4:00. But she could not get to the theater that day. Toward lunchtime, Frederick called. Isabella answered the phone. "You're home." There was a sense of relief in his voice that she didn't understand and became alarmed. "I'm home for now. What happened?" "Stay there. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right there." He came up very quickly indeed, and it was not a quarter of an hour before they heard the wicket door bang. Frederick walked briskly toward the house. He greeted John briefly. "Let's go somewhere. We need to talk," he threw to Isabella. Isabella called him into the kitchen, where she and her grandfather usually discussed all matters at the literally round table. "Do you want coffee?" She put cups and sugar on the table. "Wait a minute," Frederick said. "You listen to me carefully now. There's something very wrong." And he said that the monarch's men are now, after his departure, divided into 2 parts. There are those who want to keep their place under the new mistress, and there were others, those who had been closer to the monarch under him and were well aware of the dislike the monarch felt for his eldest daughter. They knew that the master wished not to leave Alla a beggar, but not to give her much freedom either, and his last order to take care of his youngest daughter so that she would never know need again was also known to those especially close to him. And another guard called Shriek, whom Frederick trusted like himself, whom the master also trusted, saw her lawyer come to see Allah today. The man was a total nutcase, Frederick explained, and so he came to ask. Shrek had heard whether Allah would fight for the inheritance, challenge it from you. He said he could try to prove that you're nothing, and your name is nothing. Some girl. We made a deal with her yesterday. You idiot, Frederick said pityingly. The lawyer said, "So what if there are DNA tests? It can be solved if you want. A girl." And Alice says, "What girl? There will be no girl in a week." Isabella turned pale. It was a good thing Grandpa couldn't hear. She sank back in her chair. "Does Allah just want to kill me? We don't know what she wants yet, but we'll figure it out. Why don't you just go away? And quickly. You don't have to think about where you're going. Your father has thought of everything for you." Frederick took a sealed envelope out of his jacket pocket and handed it to Isabella. There was no inscription on the envelope, but the yellowing of the paper showed that it had been in Frederick Nee's possession for a long time. "The monarch told me back when he said, 'If she's in any danger, send her there.' But where to, my God? I don't know. I'm not supposed to know, and no one can know, not even your grandfather. Not a living soul, so you don't say anything. We know how to ask. Don't you go pale here. I'll leave now. You open the envelope. You'll collect the money for your things. Another envelope, much thicker than the first one. No cabs, understand? You go to the highway, hitch a ride. And I don't want you here for a while. I'll follow you to the back, though, so that if anything. And Grandpa? And Corey?" Frederick thought for a moment, looking at his lowered hands, and made up his mind. "All right. Call your grandfather. Damn you all to hell." John couldn't stand it when he found out what was the matter. She's a child. Screw you and your gangsters, your inheritances, your relatives, your castles. Leave her alone. They won't, Frederick said. Even if your granddaughter gives up everything, Allah won't risk it. So, grandfather, pack your bags too and think of a place to disappear to. For 2 weeks at least. I'm not letting Isabella go alone, John shouted. I'm going with her. Of course you will. The monarch, if he sends her to a safe place. And if he doesn't write anything about you, it means you can't go there. They don't give a shit about you, but they'll cut you to ribbons to find out where your granddaughter is. So you can't know anything either. John paced and paced around the kitchen. Then he would take his head, then turn and walk swiftly to the window. Isabella watched him with fearful eyes. All right, he finally decided. I'll ask the guys I know to take me with them. I'll go with them on a voyage to Batumi. Isabella clasped her hands to her chest. Corey. Grandpa, Corey. All right, if he goes, we'll take him, John said grumpily. But what about you? How do I know you're okay? I'll go crazy out there. There's no way out, Grandfather. Do you understand? There is no way out. And Frederick turned to Isabella. Come on, get ready. Will 20 minutes be enough for you? I'll wait here. Yes, and make some more coffee. I didn't sleep last night either. Entering her room, Isabella sank down on her bed. She had to get herself together so that she wouldn't miss anything. Get all the things she might need, and most importantly, to put herself in such a state of mind that she wouldn't become completely confused, to keep her thoughts clear. In a situation like this, that was the only thing that could save the day, while her hands were trembling. And with trembling hands, she opened the envelope, took out a small sheet of paper torn from a notebook, unfolded it. Her eyes caught the first word, Shada. Dong the Chinese sat on the terrace, exposing his small, dry, wrinkled face to the sun. It seemed carved out of stone. The rocking chair, too, had long since fallen silent. Only a light, hot breeze came sometimes. Only a carefree starling sang in the garden. A young girl came out on the terrace with a tray. She was about 17 years old at the most. She wore a pink silk blouse and black silk pants. Her hair was braided. The girl's pretty face was concentrated as she carried a tray. Dong's grandniece was named Zulin, which meant dainty orchid. She was indeed small, frail and graceful, arms and legs like a child. When the family was concerned about who would take care of Dong and help him talk to the people who came to see him, Dong asked his niece to send Zulin to him. She can cook better than any of your kids. I'm taking a real treasure from you. And now, Zulin was carrying his lunch, a deep earthen bowl that exuded a divine fragrance. Zulin had made chicken and rice noodles. She didn't forget to put garlic and bell peppers, ginger, soy sauce, and wine vinegar, and the seasonings that are known to be the soul of any Barian. Dong's thin nostrils flickered. Zulin placed a carafe of cold rice, same vodka, a shot glass, on the table. She smiled slightly. This was why Dong had asked for her to be the one to come. Zulin was silent. She would not say a word, as if she were not there. But she understood everything with half a word. Can you feel it? Dong spoke for the first time that morning, and his voice sounded hoarse. Zulin replied, Yes, yes. How do you feel? Death is coming. I have to stay here. I'm expected to help now. You should be here too for now. I can't do this alone. Zulin tilted her head. The meal passed in silence. Afterward, Dong sat there with his eyes closed, his face in the sun, unmoving, as still as a statue. Years ago, when that higher power, that voice of silence to which he obeyed, had called him here, there had been many obstacles. He came from another country. He didn't know the language. He didn't know the laws, and he didn't know how to pay bribes. He needed to settle here, and the laws would not allow it. No one would look at the fact that a small, not young, lonely Chinese man could pose no threat to anyone. So Dong went to the monarch. He went with his mother, Zulin, who could translate his word. Surprisingly, he was allowed to see the monarch. Either the all-powerful master of the land was interested in the unusual visitor and wanted to amuse himself, or he thought that such a strange visit could warn him of something. Either way, the monarch did not risk missing something important. The Chinaman spoke to the monarch with his eyes half closed, as if he saw something before him that was invisible to the human eye. The higher powers have commanded me to be here on this earth. But human laws, the laws of your country, prevent me from doing so. You can help me. Why should I help you? The day will come when I will be able to help you in a way that no other person on earth can. I will be able to repay you. And the superstitious monarch who wore a great golden cross, who donated cosmic sums for the church, who was prayed for a generous fee in the 7 main monasteries of the country, could not ignore the patronage of that higher power, of which he had heard nothing until now. And Dong settled in a house for which he did not have to pay. And since then, no one had ever asked him for documents. And now he had to pay the bills. And he had a rough idea of what the price would be. Maybe he'd come to take on that kind of debt and pay it off that way. Despite the fact that the future promised complete uncertainty, Isabella had packed only a small backpack. She didn't want things to burden her. Soon she was standing in front of Frederickney, pale, collected in every sense of the word, and waiting for orders. Frederick drank the last sip of coffee. Let's go. You've got a bus station near here. Don't go there so no one will remember you. Keep going down the highway. Get a hitchhiker, preferably a truck. Those chauffeurs aren't likely to ask you anything. Don't say where you're going. Name a place near where you want to go. Go earlier or later. You can walk to your appointment. Dressed well, you'll look like a tourist. And there are a lot of them now. You won't be conspicuous. Baby! John hugged her tightly, turned to Frederick now. Well, walk her out. Can we at least walk her home? Don't forget Corey, Isabella whispered. He's as carefree as a fool. Make sure he's with you. I'll walk her myself, Frederick said and stood up. Just don't look back, you hear? I'll be about 100 feet behind you. Isabella arrived in Shada in the late afternoon, and it took her a long time to get there, so she had lost track of who had driven her to where. She remembered the address, and it was not without difficulty that she found the house of an old Chinese man in a small village. There was a bell at the gate, like in a fairy tale. Pull the string. And indeed, when she pulled the string, almost immediately light footsteps sounded, and a teenage girl opened the gate in front of her. There was no doubt that she was related to the Chinese. Xulin bowed slightly. Then she spoke to her on the phone, telling her her story. Come in, we're waiting for you. She went ahead of Isabella to the house, straight as a string. Pink blouse, black pants. Dong was still sitting on the terrace, half covering his eyes, swaying in his wicker chair. The girls went up the steps, and Xulin stepped back and stood behind the Chinese. Hello, said Isabella, timidly. The surroundings did not call for reverence. A poor old house, a wooden terrace with peeling floorboards, a wicker armchair, a small low table, 2 chairs. But Isabella was very uneasy. Dong gestured to the chair in front of him to sit down. She took off her backpack, put it on the floor in a corner, walked over and sat down. She put her hands between her knees. The Chinese man said something. Look him in the eye, Xulin translated. Isabella stared into those small, dark, impassive eyes for a long time, blinking from time to time. Then the Chinaman put the back of his hand to her forehead, held it there for a few moments, and then said something curt again. Stretch your arms forward, came Xulin's gentle voice. Isabella stretched out. He took both her wrists and held them for a long time with his warm, dry, almost weightless fingers. It was the way you hold when you feel for a pulse. Then he let go of Isabella's hands and, looking into her eyes, spoke. He stopped after a few sentences so that Xulin could translate. You're poisoned. You'll live another 6 days. It's a slow poison. It's a poison brought from the east. No one here knows this poison. No one here knows this poison. No one knows how it works. They won't know you've been poisoned. Every day you'll get weaker and weaker, like you're tired. Then you'll break out in a cold sweat, and your heart will stop. They'll say you died of a heart attack. Isabella looked at the Chinaman with widened eyes. So then when she and Allah were drinking wine, could it have been put in the wine? Is all she could find to ask. It's very rarely used. Expensive poison. Very expensive. Royal. It's put in wine or sweets. No taste, no smell. 10 drops, death immediately. 5 drops, death immediately. 5 drops, death in a few days. No one will blame the person who poisoned. Isabella sat stunned, as if she had received a very severe blow. Still, she had no courage. Modern man is helpless before death. Pathetic, but what will happen to Grandpa when he finds out she's dead? She won't even be able to say goodbye to him. Or will she still have time to see him? Because now it's all the same. She doesn't have to hide from anyone anymore. That's what the phrase meant. And in a week, the girl will be gone. She doesn't need to be killed. She's already carrying death inside her. There's no cure for this, is there? With trembling lips, she clarified, "It can't be. The hospital won't understand. They won't believe you." Chinaman paused. He hesitated. "I can help," he finally said. "You." Isabella couldn't believe it. I have a remedy for this poison." "What?" "I realized it's useless now. It's hopeless. I'm gonna die anyway. You said you want me to give it to you. Is it the remedy?" "Why do you ask that?" Isabella was crying now. "I shouldn't want this. Do you think I should die? Or should I pay you for the medicine?" Chinaman's words fell like stones. "Because if you survive, they'll try to kill you again." Dong stood up, small, puny, in a long, floor-length robe. "Stay here." They both didn't expect it to turn out this way. Dong could not imagine that he would ever encounter this poison, called secret death in his homeland, again in his life. Twice in his life he had delivered people from the curse of this poison, and both times the killers had tried to follow through. Isabella too sat in a complete confusion of feelings. Anything could have crossed her mind, but not this. Was she to be killed? They would probably shoot her, stab her, run her over with a car, throw her from a height. In her homeland, the bandits acted differently, more brutally. But these bandits were so fucking elegant. There was a reason both Allah and Mickey had lived so long in the East. Dong prepared the drink, carefully measuring the drops, shaking the vials with a steady hand. Any of the herbs and infusions he had in his possession, he could have prepared with his eyes closed. This time it was a complex composition. Any other remedy was like a 3-note song. This one requires a whole orchestra. He went out onto the terrace and beckoned the girls to him. "Take her to the bedroom," he said to Exulin, "and tell her that when she drinks the potion she will sleep. A long sleep. Her sweat will be dirty, almost black. When she wakes up she'll be as weak as a newborn baby." "Will she stay alive?" Exulin asked. "If she's lucky. If not, it won't be the poison that kills her. It'll be the people who gave it to her." Exulin ushered Isabella into a small, half-dark bedroom with only a bed. A tall metal back bed, a Holland stove, and an old armchair. Exulin pulled back the covers on the bed. "Get down." Isabella threw off her shoes and settled down awkwardly. Her eyes were frightened. "Drink up." She drank it in 3 gulps before she could taste it. When Isabella began to fall asleep, she was desperately afraid for a while. She thought that this was death, that she would die here, in this house, this night, with strangers. But Dong sat beside her in the chair, motionless as a guardian, and his lips spoke and spoke some ancient words she did not understand. And the fear receded before the feeling of fatigue that grew stronger and stronger. Sleep, only sleep. The girl slept and breathed evenly. The room became completely dark. Dong got up, walked over to the girl, touched her forehead with the palm of his hand. Her forehead was wet. Dong went to his room and picked up the phone. "Come," he said to his friend Leon. "Come tonight. I need you." Leon arrived around midnight. He didn't know what had happened. but the time assigned to him told him a lot. He left the car in a nearby alley and approached Dong's house almost by feel, without lighting a flashlight. He opened the wicket door without knocking. His footsteps were inaudible, but Exulin was already standing on the porch waiting for him. After seeing him to Dong's house, Exulin, without asking anyone, began to prepare tea. She did it slowly. She boiled water, brewed the tea in a large porcelain teapot, and added dried jasmine flowers. Men need time to talk, but they would need their strength tonight. Leon and Dong's conversation was brief. The Chinese man told what an unexpected guest had shown up on his doorstep, who her father was, and what he had done for him, for Dong, and then went on to what her father had bequeathed to the girl, and what she was now threatened with because of this inheritance. "It can't be," said Leon. "Why such a hard way? She could have just been killed." In the United States, how hard could it be? Finally, she could have renounced her inheritance in favor of that Shakespearean sister, Lady Macbeth. Why make things so complicated, take such a circuitous route? "You have a saying," Dong said slowly, "for a rabid dog. 7 miles is no detour." "Yes, right. And it seems complicated to you who knows nothing about poisons, who has never even thought about them until now. Actually, it's the easiest thing in the world. You don't go looking for someone who's willing to kill. You don't take risks. You invite a man over. You buy him sweet wine. You become his best friend. Then you say goodbye, and all is well. He's fine and you're fine. A week later, the doctors find your best friend has an unexpected heart condition that hasn't shown up before. And they don't have time to save him. He just dies in their arms. But this girl you were able to help. I gave her the antidote. But you know what happens now. If she'd stayed there at home, it would have been easy for them, for the killers. She'd get the occasional phone call in her remaining days. She'd be barbarianized. She would die suddenly in front of the doctors of a heart condition. She'd be buried. There are no other heirs, no argument. It's all right. And now she's gone. Okay? They know there's no escaping this poison. Death is sucking on her like a spider. They'll be waiting for word. In a week's time, wherever the girl is, it won't be her. It'll be her body. They wait. They'll know she's dead, and they'll calm down too. That's what they think will happen. Now the girl disappears. No body, no news. If all this was happening in my country, it would be harder for them. There are people there who could help this girl the way I did. Here, it's easier for them. Here, I'm the only one who can do it. Sooner or later, the road will lead to me. And that's where it has to end. Hide the girl in your room for now. What's next? We're gonna have to wait a little longer. There's someone in that wolf's nest to stand up for her. But what, Dong? How can you stay here? You have to hide too. It won't end here. They'll come after you. Dong pressed his lips together so that they turned into a string. He remained silent for a moment. It won't end there. But I can't send anyone to their death, and I can't send anyone to their death. I'll tell you one phrase and you decide for yourself what to do next. That's the phrase, as long as your head's in the right place, you'll find your hands. At that moment, Leon didn't think about Dong's words, something he regretted very much afterward. But how do I know this girl is no longer in danger? Hide her in your place, Dong said without answering his question. Leon stood up. Come with me too. You and Xulin, you'll stay with me for a while. Dong was silent and Leon realized that meant no. Xulin brought jasmine tea on a tray, sat down on the edge of a chair, moved his eyes from one to the other. Xulin, your grandfather is being stubborn. Well, you explained to him that if he fears something, if he believes that those fears have merit, then you must leave too. There's plenty of room in the car. Xulin looked questioningly at Dong and apparently read the answer in his eyes. She lowered hers and said, a man knows his time limit. Leon slammed his palm on his knee in annoyance. Stubborn. both of them. All right, lead the way. And the tea? I'm sorry, some of the time. Theoden led him into the bedroom, where the nightlight was burning. There on the edge of the bed was a girl of about 13, small and covered with a blanket. Theoden brought the lamp closer, wiped off something that looked like dirt from the girl's face. After that, the sleeping girl's face looked completely white to Leon. Is she alive? Alive, Theoden nodded. I'll try to wake her up now. It succeeded only partially. Isabella opened her eyes, huge gray, and looked at Leon and Exulin as if trying to figure out who they were. It's okay, Theoden said. You're okay. You need to hide at his place for now, this man. He's a friend of ours. He'll take you to his house. Can you get up? Isabella tried to rise, to lean on her arm, but her arm broke and she fell face down into the pillow. It was as if her body didn't belong to her. I see, Leon said. Stand back a moment, Theoden. He tucked the blanket in and gently lifted Isabella into his arms. She weighed really nothing. Zulin rushed over and opened the door for them. Leon carried Isabella out of the house and walked leisurely to the car, his steps still light and inaudible. Placed the girl in the back seat. Thulin, who was shadowing them, managed to slip a small velvet cushion under her head. Let's go with us, Leon begged. Get Grandpa here. Let's go. Thulin almost jumped away from his jeep, afraid he'd drag her in too. She put her hands behind her back and shook her head. Leon got behind the wheel and started the engine, trying to keep things as quiet as possible. He drove off without turning on the lights. Xulan stood on the road for a long time, staring after them as if she were stalling for time, not going home. The ceiling of the room was flooded with sunlight. Isabella heard the sing-song voice of the stairs, and a few moments later the door opened without a knock. With her head slightly ducked, low ceiling, sloping roof. A tall, not young man entered the room. It seemed she'd seen him the night before. Or had she dreamed it? He held a large mug in his hand. Good morning, said the man. I thought you were still asleep, so I didn't want to knock. How are you feeling? Better. After a long silence, Isabella's voice was hoarse. That's the most important thing. You're supposed to have milk, but I guess the store milk's probably no good. This is from the market, fresh. He held out the mug to Isabella, but the mug was too heavy to hold. The man sat next to him on the bed. He held the mug and Isabella drank. It wasn't very comfortable because the milk was spilling, running down her chin. Isabella used to drink like that when she was a child, and her grandfather would say, well, you've grown a milky beard. It was uncomfortable but delicious. She drank and drank until the huge mug was half empty. They got along. Isabella was slowly coming to her senses. Leon put a small radio on the table and turned the wheel, tuning it to one wave or another. The sound was not the clearest with interference, but it seemed that the music came to them from the distance where it was being played. It felt distant. They sat like that for hours. Leon was working on his chisel. Isabella was reading, curled up in an old armchair. The music changed to the news, and Leon reached for the wheel. I can't stand this politics. Suddenly his hand froze, and in the next instant he turned on the sound for full power. A criminal case has been opened over a double murder in the village of Shada. A man who may be involved in this crime has already been identified. Isabella slowly brought her palm up to her mouth. Leon jumped up. I'll call. Maybe not yet. Maybe it wasn't then. Isabella shook in a way that the comparison, like an aspen leaf, wouldn't seem like an exaggeration. Leon returned a quarter of an hour later, and Isabella was struck by how blackened his face was. He sat down in the same chair he had sat in the day before, rubbing his face with his hands. Well, he and Exulon. Shot them both. She was lucky, if I may say so. He probably would have been killed, and she would have been taken away, and questioned, but she ran. She probably wanted to call for help. She ran very fast. She was shot on the run. Isabella sobbed. It's okay, I'll figure it out. Leon's cheeks were turning jaundiced. I'll go visit Allah. It couldn't be 2 days later. Mickey said irritably yet lazily, sprawled in a chair by the fireplace. The fact that Allah was nervous was much more noticeable. She stood up, walked around the room, sat down again. She looked older than her years. Allah had always been very careful about her figure, counted every piece she ate, and was thin. Now the thinness was wrinkled. Her skin seemed yellow. Her hair hung in icicles. But it was perfect, Mickey exclaimed, even more irritated. And you proved it yourself. Yes, perfect. Allah agreed and put out her cigarette in the ashtray. And she'll die beautifully without suffering. And will show up at the funeral, grieving relatives. Now think where to look for this living corpse. But we got to the Chinese guy fast. Yeah. Quickly. Allah teased. To find that damn Chinese guy, I had to. Do you know, literally and figuratively, how much it cost me? And now these have made it so I have to start all over again. The string is broken, but the tip remains. The tip. What are you talking about? So now we have to get the Chinaman's connections. Think about it. He knew the risk of sending that girl away. He wouldn't have entrusted that golden egg to just anyone. So he had someone close to him helping him, and someone with whom he could freely explain himself, bypassing the Chmekodavka translator. He didn't speak Russian. He understood some words. Now tell me, how many people here in the surrounding towns and villages speak fluent Chinese? Speak fluent Chinese. It's as rare as that damn Chinaman himself in our area. He's a bitch. How much money he set me up for? I paid a lot of money for that poison. I wanted to put her down gently, like a vet would a pet dog. Well, you didn't want that so much as you wanted to keep us out of trouble. And now it's... Yeah, no. Oh, that's right. No accidents. We're having a gloomy conversation. Ola started to calm down, made a grimace. Let's have a drink. She went into the next room, stayed there for a while, and then appeared on the doorstep. Shall we go? I've already poured. Woman, you don't trust a man to open a bottle. God, if you knew how many of them I've discovered in my lifetime. I hope it's rum? He asked, not getting up from his seat. No, just cognac. All right, bring your cognac. I said, get it. I'm too lazy to get up from my seat. Allah brought a bottle on a small tray, shot glasses in which the cognac was already poured, a lemon and a vase with chocolates. Allah drank her shot with undisguised pleasure and immediately poured herself a second one. Mickey seemed to want to take his time, but then he drank it down and reached for the lemon. That's what a good cognac is, he said. Easy to drink. It slips down your throat. And yet I think it would be better by car, said Allah, unable, apparently, not to continue this exciting conversation. Let her be hit by a car at high speed. A random car accident. There are so many of them now. She reached for the lemon, too, and suddenly shrieked. There was a man standing in the doorway of the room she had just come from. Mickey shuddered. How could a stranger be here in a completely closed house, with all the alarms and video cameras, with walls as big as medieval fortresses, with barbed wire on top of them? In short, with all the things that were used to keep their peace and keep out the world for those who counted themselves. Among its elite, how could a stranger be here? What do you want? Allah shrieked. The man was tall. He blocked the entire door. Me? He shrugged. I don't need anything. You're the one who needs to see this through, I understand. And you won't give up. Who are you? Are you from Isabella? Do you know you can't just walk out of here? The guards. What are you gonna do to me? Why did you come? Allah shouted hysterically. She raised her voice deliberately, hoping that someone would hear, that someone would come running, that the guards would round him up. She was especially annoyed and frightened that Mickey didn't even seem to be getting up. She had yet to see him in a fight, in a man's fight. She didn't know if he could be her defense. But he wasn't even trying. "What will you do to me?" repeated the stranger. Ala squinted her eyes. "You'll be killed. No one here is going to know why you're trespassing. But you're not getting out of here." He nodded as if satisfied. "Payback should be the same," the man said. "You tried to poison a girl who was innocent of anything. When my friend saved her, you killed my friend. On your orders, you shot another girl, almost a child. You poisoned Isabella by putting poison in her wine. And now, a few minutes ago, you drank the poisoned wine. This is payback." "What?" Leon reached forward with his hand. The lid on the massive ring was open. The stash was empty. He brought the ring to Ala's face, who recoiled, then to Mickey's face. He tried to jump up at last, but Leon twisted him in one motion and threw him back into the chair. "Once upon a time, when I wanted to leave this world as soon as possible, a friend of mine, the same Chinese man, there was poison in the stash. A special poison. A merciful one. If you realize you must leave," Dong said, "dissolve the powder in water and drink it. There will be no turning back. There is no antidote in nature. You will only have time to pray, to ask the higher powers to forgive you for all you have sinned in this life and allow you to be united with those you love in the next world. You will only have time to turn to God. You had time to pray too, but you spent it on threats." Leon turned and walked away. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ala clinging to the table with her hand, struggling to stay on her feet. Then she sank heavily to the floor. He was not interested in the rest. The story made a lot of noise. About an hour after Leon left the gloomy mansion, the bodies of the mistress and her lover were discovered by the maid. In a panic, the maid called an ambulance, and the ambulance in turn called the police. Young, healthy, and vigorous people, not drunks or drug addicts, died in an instant, and there were no signs of violent death. No signs of home invasion either. Hell of a Sherlock Holmes, as one of the cops put it. The autopsy also revealed nothing. Both the man and the woman's hearts simply stopped. This caused a lot of difficulties. What to write down as the cause of death? We tried and tested because science was silent, stood aside, and could not suggest anything. In order to explain the one-stage death, they decided to attribute it to the use of an exotic drink, which the woman and her partner brought from the distant islands, where they lived for the last months, left without a head. Ala's people immediately stopped looking for her sister. They didn't care about her now. But the two who cut short the lives of Dong and his niece, Frederick shot personally. He remained loyal to the late monarch and punished anyone who even indirectly raised a hand against his daughter. All the property of the childless Ala, according to her will, passed to her mother. The woman was informed of this in advance. It was noted by everyone afterward that at the funeral she sobbed quite restrainedly. The tour of the castle for grandfather and granddaughter was arranged by some cool real estate or history expert. Corey had whispered to Isabella that she looked like a crow. The woman was indeed gaunt, black-haired, with a thin, long nose. And her dress, by the way, was black. She waited for them on the doorstep of the castle and tried to make her smile as friendly as possible. She led them through countless rooms and corridors for 2 hours so that John's feet were desperately sore. "Here," said the crow, opening another door, "is the collection of icons, which contains very valuable exhibits. There are well-preserved specimens from the 14th, 15th, and 16th and 16th centuries. The covers are of splendid artistic workmanship and are decorated with pearls, precious and semi-precious stones." Eventually, Isabella and Corey escaped. They slammed the doors of the rooms at random and eventually found themselves in one of them, which was clearly a bedroom. There was a bed under a crimson canopy, a A painting on the ceiling of a shepherd boy and a shepherdess in idyllic poses. He playing a piper, she sitting on his lap. A huge chandelier with electric bulbs tapered to look like candles hung low. A chandelier once fell on me at home, Isabella said. I was asleep and it just snapped and hung on the wire. I woke up thinking someone had attacked me. Oh, what a balcony. The balcony was really gorgeous. The lattice alone was worth it. The Hermitage. And what a view from here. You'll be sitting with a glass of champagne and admiring the sunrise over the sea, Corey said. Isabella wrinkled her nose. What's the depth of this place? What if you can dive off the balcony like a ski jump? They lay on the bed under the canopy for a while longer. They lay cheek to cheek and panted after running around the castle. You're the richest bride we have in town now, Corey said thoughtfully. Isabella became angry. What a lot of thoughts you're having today, one sillier than the other. Well, go ahead. Corey staggered back. Such a thought had certainly never occurred to him. For years now, Isabella had been like a sister to him. Isabella jumped off the bed and shook off her skirt. She felt like everything in the castle was soaked with dust. Let's go find Grandpa. They found John and Crow in the basement where the tour ended. There were wine cellars. They sat at the long oak table with their grandfather and tasted the wine, which burned amber in the sunlight. Madeira, Crow said in a slurred voice. Favorite wine. How? Dad wanted to imitate too. What are you going to do with this big thing? Said John. What are you going to do with it? Are we going to move in here? You and I will be walking in the morning, and even then we won't find each other. Not a problem, said Isabella. I'll donate this huge thing to the theater. Frederick's jaw dropped, of course. And so did everyone else in the room. The conservatory would have a great foyer. Isabella had already taken a good look at everything during the tour, and had a keen eye for everything. And the canopy bed will be useful too, she added menacingly. It's very good for strangling Desdemona. If Othello doesn't suffocate her, she will suffocate herself from the dust. A few days later, Isabella's picture, a young heiress and philanthropist, appeared on the cover of a glossy magazine. The head teacher, Anna, who'd once taught the girl and predicted that she would have a career on the panel, saw the magazine in a kiosk and could not believe her eyes. Then she bought it, hoping that it was a mistake, read the article, and became numb. The girl from a poor family whom she wished the worst for had just laughed at her. Shame on her. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.